Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 207, Geopolitics. Please click the like button as you come in. Share the video if possible. And there's a document description beneath the video for you to follow along with. I'm sorry for the delay. I just got back in, so let me get started and we can get it cracking. Complex Design, what's going on? DE Raptor, what's going on? CR Frank, what's going on? Yeah. So give you guys another 30 seconds to get in. The doc is going to be short tonight. Shaw Willie, how are you doing? Greetings to you. Raining Woman, how are you doing? DE Raptor, I see you just joined us. How are you doing, brother?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. We're going to get started in about a
Okay.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, we're going to get started. All right, so first item on the docket is from theguardian.com. U.S. prosecutors to help themselves to Julian Assange's possessions. Material from WikiLeaks founder's time in Ecuadorian embassy is said to include 2 manuscripts. Julian Assange's belongings from his time living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London will be handed over to U.S. prosecutors on Monday, according to WikiLeaks. Ecuadorian officials are traveling to London to allow U.S. prosecutors to help themselves to items including legal papers, medical records, and electronic equipment, it was claimed. WikiLeaks said UN officials and Assange's lawyers were being stopped from being present. Lawyers said it was an illegal seizure of property which has been requested by the U.S. authorities. The material is said to include 2 of Assange's manuscripts. Assange was dragged out of the embassy last month and is serving a 50-week prison sentence for bail violations. He faces an extradition request from the U.S. next month. Kristen Harfinson, the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, said on Monday Ecuador will perform a puppet show at the embassy of Ecuador in London for their masters in Washington, just in time to expand their extradition case before the UK deadline on the 14th of June. The Trump administration is including its allies to behave like it's the Wild West. Baltasar Garzón, the international legal coordinator for the defense of Assange and WikiLeaks, said it is extremely worrying that Ecuador has proceeded with the search and seizure of property, documents, information, and other material belonging to the defense of Julian Assange, which Ecuador arbitrarily confiscated, so that these can be handed over to the agent of political prosecution against him in the United States. It is an unprecedented attack on the rights of the defense, freedom of expression, and access to information exposing massive human rights abuses and corruption. We call on international protection institutions to intervene to put a stop to this persecution. So what's happening with Assange right now is he's being illegally detained. Quick backstory is that he went into the Ecuadorian embassy to seek asylum from uh, persecution in 2012, and he's been in there for ever since then. There was a case brought to him or brought against him from Sweden that he allegedly was engaging in sexual misconduct or rape of two women in Sweden, and the case was dropped in 2016 due to lack of not lack of evidence, but the witnesses recanted this story. Uh, he's now being charged with illegal tampering of U.S. Of equipment in the U.S., so electronic data systems in the U.S. The accusation is further that he helped Chelsea Manning, who was at the time Bradley Manning, working in the U.S. military, to have to break electronic access to military systems for data. However, there is no real way to prove that Julian Assange actually assisted in this based on the text messages from Bradley Manning, Chelsea Manning, who was Bradley Manning at the time, communicating with somebody on the opposite end on how to illegally enter military systems within the U.S. Military. So he's being held for 50 weeks, in a British prison for failure of bail, which is a trumped-up charge. And now the United States wants to extradite him, and then having access to his belongings. So the Ecuadorian government has sold out to Assange. Anybody have anything they want to add to this on the panel? Scholar Chang, how are you doing, brother?
I don't know. From following this exercise, every law that has governed diplomatic relations between countries has been broken with Assange, and it looks like what they're trying to do really is create evidence. When they go after what he, because they're trying to get things with. It's like coming to my house, getting my computer, and then putting something on my computer to prove that what they're saying is correct. So that's what it appears. That's the appearance it gives to me.
Scholar Chang, do you have anything you want to add to this? Well, I think Scholar Chang is away right now. Maybe um, might be having been detained at a Taiwanese embassy. We'll see. All right, this next one is from Yahoo.com. Lockheed Martin in a dogfight with Boeing puts the F-35 on sale. Lockheed Martin, seeking to give its F-35 a leg up against a rival fighter offered by Boeing, is dramatically reducing the F-35 sticker price for the next batch of jets it will sell to the Pentagon. The aerospace company is offering the base model of the fifth generation F-35 for $80 million apiece in negotiations with the Pentagon, according to a report from Defense One. That's an 11% reduction from the $90 million price last September when the last tranche of fighters were ordered. The F-35 has been marred with lengthy development delays and cost overruns, but the plane is now operational and is steadily becoming a key part of the U.S. arsenal. The Pentagon is expected to finalize its next order for the fighter this summer. Analysts have been expecting each batch to come in cheaper than the last, but the amount of this latest reduction is likely to take some by surprise. Lockheed Martin has been under constant pressure to bring down the cost of the F-35, but the urgency has increased since the Pentagon reversed course and decided to buy new Boeing F-16s or F-15s, sorry, for the first time in 2 decades. The modernized F-15EX is significantly upgraded compared to the original 1960s era plane, with a sophisticated electronic suite, but it's still last generation technology that up until recently was of little interest to the military procurement officials. The decision to buy F-15s, according to the Pentagon's acquisition summary, reflects the department's strategy to layer capabilities to address different threat situations. The government is buying F-35s to address advanced technology aircraft being developed by Russia and China, the report says. But to defeat lower technology platforms, it was to use older designs, which normally have lower operating costs when compared to fifth generation combat jets such as the F-35. Cost is key. The F-15 decision came down to the Pentagon wanting to squeeze as much military might as possible from limited funding, and at a time when the military has a long wish list for new equipment. So, DE, your old Air Force guy, what's your take on this hoopla?
I don't know. From looking at this whole scenario, I don't think the F-35 is performing as they expected it to. They wanted it to, and they have to have the F-15 is a pretty good aircraft. It is not the stealth aircraft that the F-35 is, but the F-35, they can't get it right. They're losing too many of them, and it's not operating as an aircraft should, as an aircraft of that type should. And every time they put it in some war scenario, it falls out of the air, it fails. But the F-15 is a trusted. It is one of the best performers that they have. You know, it can carry the necessary weapons for any kind of theater that they want to put it in. And the funny thing is that the Russians are not developing aircraft to fight the F-35. The Chinese have copied the F-35, but I don't know. Well, it's gonna take the Chinese a little while to kind of catch up. And by the time they fix the problems that they're finding with their duplicate or copy or whatever you want to call it, they would have the ability to in a fight with the F-35. They might be able to come out either equal or surpass it, because they have it's like having a skeleton and then you building what you want around it. And the Chinese are now being forced to make the modifications that they have to get that fighter up to speed. So I would agree with the F-15. What they need the F-15 to do is the maneuverability of the airplane, to update it, because the Russian the maneuverability of the latest Russian fighter aircraft or it is a little bit superior to the F-15. And the Russians are developing another aircraft right now, which is not really a stealth aircraft, but has more, even higher capability. So they have to try to keep up until they can find an airplane that they can match with the Russians and the Chinese in the future. Because we don't build aircraft. The F-35 didn't come out right after the F-15 or F-16. You know, it's like 25 years now.
Hmm.
So they can't wait another 25 years to develop a better airplane. So they better get rid of that one and start making another airplane now. That's my
Right,
opinion.
right. The Su-35, the Sukhoi 35, is actually superior to the F-15 and F-16. Um, the Su-34 is also superior to that of the F-15 and F-16. And then you take into consideration um, the MiG, uh, the MiG-29 is actually a formidable multi-role fighter as well. So it can do everything that the F-16 could do, and then some. And if I remember correctly, the the Sukhoi 35 is comparable to the Raptor, the F-22. So the Russians don't have this sort of long lead time that they United States like the United States military contractors have for 25 years, like you were saying, DE. So they definitely the United States doesn't want to be outpaced, but the problem is you're spending 10 times more on a plane than the Russians and the Chinese are. The Chinese basically have taken bits and pieces of the F-117 Nighthawk and many other planes, such as the F-21 that they got from Israel, allegedly. Um, and they don't have they don't have the cost overrun that the United States has, the United States military has. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens because many of the countries can't afford United States hardware unless it's discounted. So if Lockheed is going to reduce the cost for the United States government, other countries are going to say, well, what about us? Why should we pay more, or why should we pay the same price as what the United States paid before?
Yeah, but they don't want to sell that. If you sell that airplane to, say, I don't know, Turkey,
Hmm.
and then the Turks take it and modify the electronics, or if you sell it to India, India is going to modify the electronics.
Hmm.
The one that they sell to Israel, you can bet the Israeli took out whatever the U.S. put in and put in a higher quality of electronics in, one that they know will work. So the U.S. is really, I don't know, they've been working on this airplane trying to perfect it,
Hmm.
and it never comes out right. They put it into service, and it's not performing as it's supposed to.
Hmm.
So it's like you're falling behind while your enemy, before, when the Russians built an aircraft, we would build one similar similar to it.
Hmm.
We will always find a way of getting one of their aircraft, and then we will build something similar to it with a little bit more power or whatever the case might be. But now, even the thrust vectoring, the Russians came up with thrust vectoring, and every one of their fighters got it. And you should see how the performance is, I mean, something that U.S. servicemen are now trying to learn to do.
Hmm.
So when you got an airplane that can outmaneuver you, a bigger airplane can carry more ordnances and a variety of ordnances far beyond yours.
Hmm.
It's hard for you to catch up if you fall behind like how they are falling behind with the F-35.
Hmm. Scholar Chang, you wanted to jump in here?
Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Sorry, did my headphone work or no?
There's a lot of feedback coming from him. If you can log out and log back in, that might help.
Hold on a second. Let me put my headphone on. Hold on a second.
Let me say one other thing. One of the things the problems that the U.S. military face is that we go to a manufacturer and say, we go to two manufacturers and say, build an airplane with this specification. And then the congressmen get involved. They don't get involved to make the best airplane that they can to defend the country. They get involved to keep that airplane in their district to get the money from that aircraft going into their, like say California, Skunk Works in California. So the congressman is going to try to keep Skunk Works in California. No matter what they do, they're going to do their best to keep that airplane. And they're going to spend as much money as they can to get it to the military. And then our producers are producing based on profit, not on the will to protect the country per se. It's not protecting the country is not the number one. They say it's the number one in the advertisement, but profit is the number one in reality. So when you build an airplane for China, the Chinese government says this is what you want. And that's what the manufacturer is going to do. Build it for what the government wants done. We don't do that.
Scholar Chang, you have something you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, I think my headphone, something wrong with my headphone. I just cannot get it to work. Okay, can you guys hear me right now?
We can hear you.
Okay, so now, I don't know if you guys heard on the news also similar to this. The reason they get the have you guys heard about how they trying to get the F-35 contract that was signed between Boeing versus Lockheed Martin?
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just wondering because I thought you guys earlier were talking about F-15, so I'm trying to figure out how to say it. Okay. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that the Russian, as well as Chinese, as you guys know, they usually have certain arsenal of weapons that just not going to be disclosed, similar to how the U.S. So we only look at from the news sources in terms of what they want us to, the ones to believe. So what I want to add is that the in terms of the true combat readiness as well as the true military capability, I don't believe that we can just accurately assess, the as far as the fitness of those aerial power of Russia and China in relation to U.S. Unless we can get a hold of those documents, we won't be able to make the assessment. So that's why Julian Assange, in the WikiLeaks comes, all these leaking documents comes into huge importance, because the fact that if we can get a hold of those documents, then we can make a better assessment. So hence, that's why they're cracking down on Julian Assange right now. So yeah, that's what I want to say. Just tie them all together.
All right. Let me get to this next article from CNN. U.S. intercepts Russian bombers fighter jets off the coast of Alaska. U.S. F-22 stealth jets intercepted 4 Russian bombers and 2 Russian Su-35 fighter jets off the coast of Alaska on Monday, according to a statement from the North American Aerospace Defense Command. The Russian nuclear-capable long-range bombers flew into the Air Defense Identification Zone, which extends approximately 200 miles off Alaska's western coast. The Russian bomber fighters are seen by U.S. military officials as part of Moscow's effort to train its military for a potential crisis while simultaneously sending a message of strength to adversaries. The latest intercept comes amid tensions with Russia on a wide range of geopolitical issues, and a week after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo met uh, Russian President Vladimir Putin in the resort town of Sochi, where he warned Russia about interfering in U.S. elections, taking a tougher public line than President Donald Trump on the issue. U.S. F-22 fighter jets and an E-3 airborne early warning and control system from North American Aerospace Defense Command positively identified and intercepted a total of 4 Tupolev Tu-95 bombers and 2 Su-35 fighters entering the Alaskan Air Defense Identification Zone (ADIZ) on May 20th. NORAD said in the comment. So, two things for me here. One, we just got finished talking about the F-22 and the Su-35, right? That's interesting that this comes up. And number two, the accusations that Russia interfered in these elections, despite the fact that the court came back and said that actually that's not the case. There's an urgency to actually continue to push this message because they really have run out of credibility. When you have Mike Pompeo saying things like this, it goes against the best interest of Donald Trump. If Donald Trump says he won fair and square, he didn't have any, there was no collusion, according to AG Barr. Why go behind your president's back and say something like that in the country of a president that says I had nothing to do with it? Your own president says there was no I never spoke to any there was no Russian interference, that he won fair and square through the electoral college. And then your AG Barr says, that there was no collusion, and yet you're still pushing this message as Secretary of State. Scholar Chang, help me understand that. DE, can you help me understand it?
Well, look, you have the president made certain promises to his electorate. People who voted for him. He's going to stand up to China. He's going to stand up to Russia. He's going to put America back in the leadership position again, because most Americans believe America is no longer the number one. That's the narrative that's been put out through the media to get more weapons, to make it look like America is this weak nation that, the president, the incoming president, has to be strong, and he's got to show his strength. And public consumption, you got to watch something. Sometimes you have to watch what's being said, because public consumption can lead you down the wrong path. And that's what's happening now is when one news, like a few weeks ago, it was Turkey, and we're not going to allow Turkey to buy the S-400. Now that's been subdued. Nobody's talking about that. Then it was India. India was buying the S-400. Now that's kind of gone out of the news. And there's this thing with Russia now and Iran. So if you leave something in the news too long, the public tend to start figuring out the facts. And so they got to keep switching this narrative. If you don't keep moving the goalposts, when people caught up to you, they're gonna say, "Well, hey, you can't fulfill your promises." You know, it's like the reason why Donald Trump walked away from the negotiation with China over trade. It's what the news is saying is actually not even 50% factual. Because if you look at what's happening to America, America is pulling back from its role as the one that everybody looks to handle every fire on the planet. And it still wants to be the strong nation, but it's still not going to pay for what everybody is doing. It's not going to pay for NATO and let the other people go free. You understand? So what's being talked about publicly, you got to watch that very carefully. And most Americans don't watch it. They go, "Hooray, we're going to kick the Russians' butt now." You know, but that's not really what's going on in the background. Really, what's going on in the background is a negotiation between them and the Russians, and they're negotiating how to pull this thing down, keep Venezuela out of the news, keep Iran out of the news, because people are saying, "Hey, you're acting the fool," you know, and that's what's happening. And Trump came up the other day and said, "Hey, I want peace with Iran." Well, not peace, but we want to talk with Iran. While his Secretary of State is saying Iran is this big bad wolf that we gotta tame, you know. So which one do you believe? The Secretary of State or the president? I tend to want to believe the president.
What's your take on 4 bombers and 2 Su-35s cruising over the West Coast?
The Russians fly that route at least twice a week, and you don't hear about it in the news. When I was in the military, it was the same way. I mean, I don't know how many times I was sitting in the office, and you hear, "Hey, the Russians are coming," you know, and pretty soon you see 2 F-15s take off, and hour and a half later they come back. They just following the Russians. The Russians have to test us. We do the same thing. Our B-52s, there's always, oh my goodness. The Russians always have 3 or 4 of those bombers in the air, armed and ready. And so do we. We have KC-135 flying 24/7. We have B-52s flying 24/7. We do the same thing as they do. Our submarines come up to their back door, knock, and see if anybody is answering. See if when our submarine comes to their back door, if a Russian attack sub doesn't show up, they swim around in the water till one show up. If our B-52 poke in one area and the Russians don't show up, they continue to fly as farther inland as possible till the Russians show up. And the Russians do the same thing with us. That's the way it goes. Well,
Scholar Cheng, you have anything you want to add to this? All right.
when one of those planes take off, we know when it's taking. We know when it's taking off. Our satellites watch that airplane take off from the runway and watch it as it's flying whatever route it's flying. Sometimes the Russians even tell us what route it's flying, and we do the same thing.
Yeah, because when Russia sent the Tupolovs, the 220, down to Venezuela, they had already called the United States in advance and told them that they were coming that route.
Yeah, that's the way they do it. You know, because they don't want a false alarm. because you know who's got, you're not always sure who's. I might be the guy who's got my finger on the button that day, and I'm looking at that radar, and I'm saying the Russians are coming. They didn't tell us anything, so it must be a real, scenario. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I'm going to send somebody, and unless if you go up there and that Russian aircraft say it lost the radio, and my guy flying the F-15 can't contact it, or the F-22 can't contact it, guess what? He's
Shoot
going to
that.
have to shoot it down
Shoot that thing down.
because he doesn't know whether it's going to make a left or right turn, or if he's going to shoot off a missile or something. So
Hmm.
they talk to each other, but these.
But for the media, it's just a political theater.
Oh yeah, the media is the one who keeps the nation on this war footing. You
Hmm.
know, the other thing is that we have to send our children to protect the country, and if we believe that we are under imminent threat, we will more easily allow our children to go.
Hmm. We got 30 people watching and only 20 likes. If you're not going to participate in the chat, please hit the like button. We really appreciate that. All right, this next one is from Quartz.com. The little known story of the Polish refugees who fled to East Africa during World War II. This is a picture of all the pale faces in the melanated continent. The historic burden wrought by World War II continues to equally shape the world today and haunt the lives of the young and old. For the Polish refugees who were exiled in Africa during that era, the war has come to define a loss of not just loved ones, but their homeland and history as well. In August 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed the non-aggression Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that included a secret protocol to partition nations, including Poland. Days later, both powers invaded Poland, mostly with the intention of dismembering Polish culture and suppressing its people. Hundreds of thousands of Poles, including educated elites and ethnic Jews, were deported to various locations in the Soviet Union, with many ending up in forced labor camps in Siberia. Barely 2 years later, the tables flipped when the German Soviet War began in 1941, pushing the socialist state to strike a deal with the Polish government exiled in London. Amnesty was granted to those in Gulag camps as part of the agreement, and many prisoners, famished and feeble, made the long treks to modern-day Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and across the Caspian Sea into Iran. Tens of thousands of those deportees made it to Africa too, spreading spreading in 2 dozen villages across 6 countries in East and Southern Africa. Their story is buried in recognized parts. Is at the center of the documentary "Memory Is Our Homeland" by the Canadian filmmaker Jonathan Duran. The film the film especially centers on Duran's own grandmother, Kazia Kolodiji, who lived in a refugee camp in uh, Tangi- Tanganyika, Tanganyika, now Tanzania. Located near the foothills of Africa's tallest peak, from 1942 through to 1952, Garich, along with her siblings and parents, lived in houses built of timber and clay with thatched roofs and no doors. Settled in settled in the Tenguru town in northern Tanzania, the community farmed and sent their children to school. Museum documents show they had also dabbled in shoemaking, weaving, toy making, and rug making, besides weaving string and rope from sisal. They also mingled with local communities, and a fact that didn't endear them to British colonial forces controlling the nation. I find this very interesting. And I don't want to read the whole thing because I do think that what's important is that you have people who come to Africa, um, take land that doesn't really belong to them and then stay. And then when Africans go to Europe, they want to get rid of these get these guys out of Europe or get these people out of Europe, but they don't want to get themselves out of Africa though. I always find that to be very interesting.
Yeah, a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Good evening, gentlemen.
What's going on, brother?
Right,
I'm chilling, man. What's going on, DE? Scholar Chang, if you're there, what's going on, brother?
Scholar Chang, you have anything you want to add to this?
I think he said he was having headphone issues.
DE, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I mean, you told a story that I never heard of before. I've heard about the Germans going down to South Africa, you know, to well, not only the Germans, but um, exiles after the war going to South Africa, Argentina, Uruguay. But this story I never heard. I heard about Russians going to Tanganyika. I know the Russians were there. The Russians are on the east coast of Africa, and that's the story that a lot of people don't know of.
Yeah.
But I had never heard about Poles being exiled into Africa before.
Hmm.
So this is a story. That's something I have to look into. Look into. This is a surprising story to me. I've heard about Jews being that happened to Jews, um, especially in what's called Zimbabwe today. A lot of them went to Zimbabwe.
Hmm.
So uh, I have to look into that story. I never heard it before.
All right. Let me get to this next article. All right, this next one is from the East African. Foreign military bases seen as threat to East Africa. Western nations, China, and emerging military powers such as India and Turkey are projecting their military might throughout East Africa, a new report says. The growing array of foreign military deployments has so far served mainly as an expression of international cooperation on benign initiatives such as preventing piracy, supporting peace operations, and providing humanitarian relief, notes the study carried out by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. Countering terrorism has also been a shared objective of Western, Asian, and Middle Eastern countries with a military presence in East Africa, the report says. But some of these foreign forces are usually military bases in the region in order to counter perceived threats from one another. And the consequences of the accelerating buildup of outside military strength may prove uh, destabilizing for East Africa, the report warns. The focus on joint efforts to promote regional security is currently being superseded by external military deployments to the Horn that are driven by geopolitical, commercial, military competition, with often with negative effects for regional stability, CIPRI states. East Africa has thus become another strategic arena with links to the other geopolitical pressure points. Foreign forces in East Africa are part of international networks of military facilities and naval deployments that together link the Horn to security developments in the Middle East and the Gulf, the Indian Ocean, and Asia Pacific, as well as other parts of Africa. India and Japan, for example, are deploying military units in East Africa partly in order to express their unease over China's projection of force into the Indian Ocean and the Horn, Dupree observes. Similarly, Turkey plans to build facilities for its military vessels on the Sudan island of Squakin in a move viewed as part of a larger geopolitical struggle between Iran, Qatar, Turkey, and Turkey on the one hand, and Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE on the other. The deal took place against the backdrop of a deepening partnership between Sudan and Turkey that has significant implications for the regional balance of power. Turkey has also built a $50 million military base in Mogadishu to train recruits for the Somali National Army. More than 200 Turkish military personnel are reported to be stationed at the base, which is Turkey's largest overseas military facility. China has meanwhile built a large naval and air base in Djibouti in close proximity to even larger U.S. base. Chinese policymakers have referred to Djibouti installation as a strategic strongpoint. It represents a forward presence designed to support the ability of the Chinese military for long-range force projection, including as part of a network of such strategic points. The facility also signifies the gradual use of Chinese sea power in the Indian Ocean. The United States maintains the single largest foreign military presence in East Africa. U.S. forces operate out of the base in Kenya and Somalia, as well as Djibouti, where some 4,000 American troops are believed to be stationed. DE, how do you feel about a crowded neighborhood of foreign militaries in East Africa?
I don't like it. Serious. That is that can throw Africa off its off course in a bid for development, because I don't know if you guys remember the war between Somalia and Eritrea, not Somalia, Eritrea and Ethiopia. That was a staged war. That war was staged to kind of box in Ethiopia. The other one that I seen something happening is Uganda and Kenya. It's not a shooting war, and they're still working together. And then you have Uganda and I forgot the name of the country. Where they had a lot of people got killed. Rwanda. Right now, there's this tiff going on between Rwanda and Uganda, and they had closed the border earlier. And countries and people on both sides that used to do trade on both sides were the ones who were getting suffered. I think the British were behind that one. You got the French in West Africa, the Israelis in the Congo. All these people are creating factions that they might not be they might not be doing the fighting, but if you got East Africa fighting against Western African nations, or Northern African nations fighting against Southern African nations, that's going to derail any development in Africa. Because now you got nations that got to spend all their capital, instead of educating the people, they're gonna be spending it buying weapons, because they feel that they got to defend their country. And the other day, was it Kenya? The British were trying to smuggle weapons into Kenya, and the Kenyans wouldn't let the ship dock until they inspected it, and the British refused to let them inspect. They turned the ship around and sailed it back, because they found British camps inside the game reserves in the jungle, and that shouldn't be there, or that somebody says shouldn't be there. So you got people that are building up for something that because Africa doesn't really have a real army. Most African countries don't have an army that can defend itself against, say, the French or the British or
Egypt could.
well, Egypt is not going to send its army to fight for Ethiopia or
Right.
Uganda.
Right.
No, they're not. They are not because they think that they are European. I tell you, the Egyptians think that they're European. They only they only think they're African when they're going to benefit from, say, trade with the Nile. You know, with if it's going to benefit them in some way. You know, so they're
Yeah.
not going to do it. They're not going to do it. It's like this. It's the other day. The problem with Somalia and the Ethiopians. The prime minister of Ethiopia went there. You know what? Shaking hands and settle this matter. That's the first time that anything like that has happened in Africa. They actually stop a war of one country against another, with one African country saying, "Hey, let's sit down and talk." And now Ethiopia is doing the same thing between Uganda and oh, I keep forgetting the name of that country, but they're
Oh,
doing the same thing again.
Rwanda.
Rwanda.
Rwanda, right? Correct. So and what happened is that uh, they form a five-nation bloc. Even though they have this tussle, they still form a five-nation bloc for trade.
I mean, they did the same thing that the stand countries did recently with the Russians. And I mean, it's amazing to me um, how this really has never been seen as a clever disguised way at a land and resource grab by other nations when you allow them to put their militaries there. They basically just they stick their flag. They have their flag right in a military setting flying on your land. You can consider it as good as under siege. You know, and so while a lot of these nations may think that they're making these strategic pacts with nations outside of the continent, right? As protective measures against like their neighbors, for example. Right behind the scenes, like okay, this country's like, all right, look, we're gonna take this country over here, and we're gonna go ahead and secure the resources there. You get those guys over there, and you get that. And so, by virtue of the fact that you've got that country, you've got that country, like we'll be good, right? That'll kind of keep the peace between us because we have our resource. We have our access to resources down the continent. You have yours, so we shouldn't have any squabbles. We shouldn't have any squabbles, and by virtue, they won't have any squabbles, or they shouldn't. But down at that level, they basically lose provenance over their own land and property. So I don't know. I've always kind of just wondered, like, man, like how do these nations on the continent keep walking into this shit? Keep walking into the same. I mean, and old tribal beefs and whatever the hell it is. I mean, whatever the nature of it is, it's kind of like, all right, well, look, in the modern time, there are other nations who will look at that and see advantages in you not being able to settle your quarrels with something as simple as a handshake, as DE mentioned.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're right. That's what Africa has to do, bro. We got to keep other foreign nations out. Because look what happened in the Middle East. You got the French, the British, the Americans, the Turks. And now the Russians are stepping in. Well, the Russians were there before, but they're coming back. And you got the Middle East in divided between these. America is supporting the Saudis to do whatever they feel like doing, supporting the British to do what they feel like doing. You know, if that happens in Africa, it's going to derail Africa's development, and that is the part that scares me right now.
All right, this next article is from the Times.com or Time.com. Why Venezuela's government and the opposition are finally coming to the negotiation table. 4 months into the chaotic political standoff between Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro regime, how can you be a president and have a regime? I always find that interesting. And opposition leader Juan Guaido's attempted revolution, officials confirmed Thursday that representatives for both sides had traveled to Norway for talks aimed at resolving the country's crisis. The Oslo talks, acknowledged by Maduro's ambassador to the United Nations, are the first real sign that his government is willing to engage in dialogue with Guaido. The president of the opposition held parliament, and his supporters, Guaido told reporters that talks did not yet amount to negotiations, but a form of mediation. But the news of possible progress came in the same week as a dramatic government crackdown on the opposition. Security forces blocked lawmakers from entering parliament on Tuesday, and intelligence agencies have placed 14 opposition lawmakers, including the vice president of parliament, under investigation for their role in the failed April 30th uprising against the government, which was dubbed a coup by Maduro. Meanwhile, Guaido said he had instructed his U.S. envoy to open relations with U.S. military and set a meeting with U.S. Southern Command, which oversees military operations in Latin America, for next week, raising fresh fears of American military involvement in the country. Tensions are rising even as the peaceful way out seems viable for the first time. Here's what to know about the chaotic interaction between the two sides in Venezuela. Maduro's government has grown increasingly authoritarian since he took over from his mentor, popular socialist leader Hugo Chavez. In 2014, a drop in global oil prices that year triggered the collapse of Venezuela's economy, sparking years of severe humanitarian crisis and widespread social unrest. Maduro responded by detaining protesters and political opponents and stripping the opposition controlled controlled parliament of its powers. Guaido and Maduro have been at loggerheads since January, when Guaido claimed that Maduro's second presidential term, won in 2018 elections, the opposition considered rigged, was invalid, and constituted a vacuum of power as parliament leader. The opposition claims the Constitution mandates Guaido temporarily take over the presidency to organize fresh elections. The U.S. and 50 other nations, 50 other mostly Western countries, have recognized Guaido as president, while Maduro retains the backing of Russia, China, and Turkey. Maduro also has the crucial support of the military, Venezuela's largest institution, which exercises security functions and controls many state bodies. The Norway talks are not the first time the two sides have been in contact, says Diego Moya Acaponos, a Latin American expert at risk analysis IHS market. There's always been back channels to try and find an electoral solution. He says the problem is there's a small group of top government and military officials who are trying to block those solutions because they fear that if there is a regime change, they will be held accountable for human rights abuses and crimes they've committed as part of the regime. Analysts and international prosecutors say that many of the upper ranks of government and military are involved in illicit money-making activities, including corruption, drug trafficking, and the theft of Venezuela's natural resources. I'm going to stop right here because the reason why they're negotiating is because they have lost momentum, and I'm speaking of the opposition. Guaido can't even run for president at this point because he's been kind of stripped of his powers for working with foreign powers, for working with foreign nations to overthrow the government of Venezuela. So he's out of the position. He can never run for president. However, the opposition party, which doesn't really have a whole lot of support to begin with, don't have the full backing of Colombian military or any other foreign military, nor do they have the backing of the state military, which is the Bolivarian Guard. So they have to come and have talks because that's the only way they can actually get their way out of this.
Yeah, not be thrown in jail or a multitude of other consequences.
Well, yeah, but and they also have their passports detained, right? They can't leave the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you don't have the backing of those other the backing of those other military forces are contingent, right? It's contingent upon a successful coup, and placement of Guaido into the position of power in Venezuela, right? These things are contingent. If the shit breaks down, they're like, look, dude, hey, we didn't sign up for this. You know what I mean? They're like, look, y'all know the deal. We played our part. I was supposed to get that shit done. You didn't get it done. We're out. And I don't. I think opposite of what we might have been seeing in the U.S. And I'm sorry, you guys. It's crazy out here right now with the weather and everything. Some of my allergies, but given everything that we've seen on U.S. media. The truth be told, I don't think I honestly believe, like, regardless of like U.S. media's best attempts to try and sell it, there literally none of the Venezuelan population got on board with that shit. As far as Guaido is concerned, I honestly think that they were like wholesale against all that shit. What they tried to sell it over here as doesn't match up with what's going on, as you can obviously see based on the article that Mike just read. So it's my opinion that, like, I think the true story in Venezuela, like, no one signed on to that shit. Everybody knew what was going on.
Right. He being Guaido, was under the impression that this would be a clean victory for him. He'll overthrow the government, and then Maduro will fly out of Venezuela and never to be seen again. Not going to happen.
Right.
Scholar Shane, dude, you trying to say something?
I don't know. He's still having mic issues.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Is it clear or is still
No, you sound good, bro.
Okay, perfect. Good. Mike, you brought a very, very important point about the fact that Guaido was not prepared to run as the quote unquote the president, because because the military, we all know that power came from the barrel of guns. The military is still largely backing Maduro. So, but on the other hand, so to be honest, I think another reason that Maduro was in power is because the fact that not only was the military was backing it, because it's also the international power. So I believe that the Russians also behind this in terms of supporting Maduro and so forth. Just like Russia was backing Iran and so forth. So really, in a way, like right now, this whole there's all these global conflict, like the recent flare of Iran versus United States, and now this Venezuela events, and also with the one with North Korea and so forth, really in a way that we witnessing the reemergence of a Cold War, except that in this case the Cold War is not so is not as cold as before, because the fact that we really fight, right now we have a multiple proxy war that's being waged.
Yeah, it's all proxy. Yeah.
Yeah. So it really is a global class. You know what it reminds me of? What it reminds me of is basically realignment of geopolitical shift between reminds me of the realignment geopolitical shift similar to pre-World War One. Except in this, pre-World War One was largely occur in the European continent. In this case, it's across the entire globe. So really, if you look back in the history, really, what I see is right now is the instead of competing power, back as pre-World War One, that is between the colonial powers and the European colonial power, we've seen a competing interest of alliance, a trans global competing power. So my concern right now is a lot of these countries right now, they are openly, a lot of these countries, for example, including United, unfortunately including us, the tone, the tone of bellicosity has become increasingly accepted, which is a terrible choice, given the fact that our technology can devastate us far more than we could, pre-World War One. So yeah, it's definitely a concern to be alarmed. It's definitely a concern that we need to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me get to this next article. All right, this next one is from NDTV. Turkey will jointly produce S-500s with Russia after purchase of S-400s. U.S. officials have called Turkey's planned purchase of the S-400 missile system, defense system, deeply problematic, saying it would risk Ankara's partnership in the Joint Strike Fighter F-35 program because it would compromise the jets made by Lockheed Martin. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said on Saturday that the purchase of the S-400 defense system from Russia was a done deal, adding that Ankara would also jointly produce S-500 defense systems with Moscow. U.S. officials have called Turkey's planned purchase of the S-400 system deeply problematic, saying it would risk Ankara's partnership in the Joint Strike Fighter F-35 program because it would compromise the jets made by Lockheed Martin. However, Erdogan told a televised question in answer section with university students in Istanbul that Turkey had carried out technical work and found that such a problem did not exist. They, the U.S., are passing the ball around in the midfield now, showing some reluctance. But sooner or later, we will receive the F-35s. The U.S. not delivering them is not an option. This is very advanced news, exclusive, because S-500 is only used in Russia. It's not used outside of Russia at all. So now when you start talking about Turkey, a NATO member, to help build the most advanced air defense system, which is the Prometheus S-500 system, this is on a different level. I did not see this one coming. I'll be honest with everybody in the chat. I have never thought that Russia would open up the design portfolio to work on the S-500 Prometheus system with another country, namely that of a NATO power. I just find that to be very interesting. Maybe Russia is looking at leveraging the cost of production and research with Turkey, because Turkey is probably saying, yeah, we need this as well, right? They want a multi-layered security solution for air defense capabilities because they probably foresee a war coming in their backyard very soon, and they'll probably shoot down every. They want to be able to have the ability to shoot down any and everything coming through their uh, through their backyard, including that of maybe Greece and other European powers. They probably see European powers coming down their backside from Bulgaria.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's also a very very slick and easy way of just having some insurance in case the whole NATO thing doesn't quite work out.
Well, even if NATO doesn't work out, they are very insulated from a country standpoint, right? Their shorelines are very shallow, so even if let's say the United States wanted to invade, they would have a very difficult time getting their way up into the beachhead because it's all jagged rocks and reef up until up on the western part of Turkey, so they wouldn't be able to get their way. Anyone, including the United States, would not be able to take down Turkey that fast. But if they wanted to fly the F-35 and the F-22 into their airspace, that could pose a serious problem, and that's what they're thinking about. They're thinking a bombardment of cruise missiles and fighter jets coming in and taking out all of their assets on the ground. Keep in mind that most of Turkey is not occupied in the west; it's occupied in the east. Um, that's where all their civilization is at. So a lot of their underbelly is coming from the western part of the state or western part of the country. Uh, Maybe a beach landing probably wouldn't be the most optimal, but from an aerial perspective, they would have to control the airspace as much as possible because you get those warships that United States has or any other country would have has at the very least 35 35 cells of um of cruise missiles even on the most basic ship. Even your most basic Corvette has at least 20 to 30 cruise missiles on board. Um, if you're Turkey, you're thinking about they're going to try to rain on top of us, and you need a strong air defense system. DE, you have anything you would add to this?
Yeah, look, Turkey was never a European nation, right, actually.
Hmm.
Europeans went after Ottomans in World War One, didn't they?
Yes.
Uh, and Turkey is seeing things change.
Hmm.
They saw they're seeing them that U.S. and Europe are going after Iran, or well, not particularly Europe, but the U.S. is going after Iran. They went after Syria. They took out Libya, took out Iraq. Now they took out Sudan. So Turkey is seeing all of this, and they are saying, we're hedging our bets. Scholar Chan just put it correctly. He says the world is realigning, and the same people you see on the side in World War One are now on the same side of World War Two. The U.S. is backing out. The Europeans are dividing themselves. Germany is kind of like out there with the French pulling one way, the British pulling another way. So this whole situation is becoming a realignment instead of just in Europe, worldwide. And the Turks are looking and say, hey, which side should we be on?
Hmm.
You know, and they say we going with the Chinese and the Russians. But the Turks and the Russians were never really, really friends.
Right.
So you got to watch that very carefully.
Hmm.
But Turkey is going to the modern Turkey is going to choose the side that has the most probable winning outcome.
Hmm.
So them volunteering or going in with the Russians to build the S-500 is going to help them, because if a war breaks out in Europe, they can say, well, you know what? We have protection, because we work with the Russians to get this fighter.
I was
And
going to
then,
say, what are you going to do? You're going to use Russian-based technology against the Russians?
well, they're not going to use it against the Russians because
Exactly. Yeah.
they know the capability. But that's part of the deal that they came out of Syria with. Are we going to fight the Russians? Or are we going to join them? And that's part of the deal. That's why the U.S. had to leave Syria, because the Turks started pulling back from helping the Americans, because the Turks started going into Syria with their army, and then suddenly they stopped. So you got to look at all these geopolitical things going on. Some are small and some are large, and you don't see them in the U.S. paper.
Well, you don't. It's not so much that. It's not so much that they stopped them. That Turkey stopped their military suddenly in Syria. They ran up against the United States because the United States was embedded in with the Kurdish defense forces, and that's what they were worried about. That if a U.S. soldier gets killed on at the hands of a Turkish invasion, what would be the consequences? And maybe Turkey said this probably isn't all that worth it. If you did come, if they did get into a conflict with the United States, how would they defend themselves? Because the United States isn't going to back down that easily. What had been happening though was that someone was killing U.S. soldiers out there. It wasn't a whole lot. I think 1, 2 at a time. Guys were getting killed, and the question was, if Turkey has to go to war over this, what would become of that? How would they defend themselves against a onslaught of the United States? Because we know that the U.S. has capabilities to take down most nation states around the world, including Turkey. If they had to go all out and beat up Turkey, but if push came to shove, could Turkey really defend itself? And they were probably looking at the optics and saying it's probably not in our best interest to go any further into Syria at this point, regardless of the fact that we don't want the Kurds there. People should keep in mind, if you're listening to this, they're talking about ethnic cleansing of the Kurds. Like this is their thing, that they're going to get rid of these people. You're talking about 65,000 people, if not more, to be cleansed out of the northern part of Syria. I think that's an absurd idea, but that's Turkey's perspective. And with the United States military embedded with the Kurds, that made it that much more difficult. So they were feigning at the they were foaming at the mouth to actually get over there and kill all these people, just wipe them off the face of the earth. And fortunately, the United States was there to actually stand up to something like that. But Turkey has to think long and hard that those coup, those members in the military who were involved in that coup in 2016 are actually living inside Greece now. Greece is a NATO member, and yet they're basically aiding and abetting of terrorists inside their country that came from Turkey. This is a very complex situation. I don't think people really understand this. The Middle East is a very big powder keg.
Well, Mike, I just want to add. I also want to add this. Well, this is not the first time Turkey has carried out genocide. I'm pretty sure you guys are all familiar with the Armenian genocide.
Yeah,
and so,
I was going to mention that.
Yeah, that's. And if you want to trace it even back, back to the old Ottoman Empire, every time when Ottoman Empire, believe it or not, conquered, even though the history books tend to overlook this, a lot of time when the origin of Turkey, right? Turkey came from amalgamation of the Mongolian, so they can trace their rule all the way back to the Mongolian Empire, and we know how brutal Mongolian Empire was back in the 11th, 10th century when they literally destroy city, country at the time, entire ethnicity. So yeah, this is embedded in their a lot of time embedded in their culture in Turkish. I don't know if you guys notice also in a lot of popular culture, speaking of Kurds, right? They have this very very uh new shows on that's on Turkish right now on Netflix. Apparently, I don't know how Netflix will get hold of that. That basically portray this all these anti quote unquote anti-terrorist. How we have the Navy SEAL 6, and so forth. Those type of show. Apparently, Turkish has their own special anti-terrorist operation forces, and they portray every single Kurds as this evil terrorist bomber and so forth. And we know that if you're looking at objective speaking, Kurds actually they just want their a lot of time they just want their own autonomy and so forth. In fact, Kurds has been very instrumental in the United States or NATO Western society period in terms of helping in terms of being the ground forces against ISIS. But of course, if we're going to debate the whole origin of ISIS, then we can. That's another whole different issue. But the point is that the point is that given the fact that United States we have a history of abandoning our allies, I'm just fear the fact that once the United States finally pull out Syrians and Iraq and so forth, what will happen to those Kurds, right? And then also on top of that, I also want to add under the Kurds protection, there was also a lot of Christian groups like Yidi and those Syrian Christians and so forth. What's going to happen to them, right? Because right now they're under the Kurds protection. So if Turkish is going to go in, he's going to go into as you put it, ethnically cleansing the Kurds. In a way, they want to wipe out all the Christians in that region also. So yeah, but you meant that as you mentioned before, that United States being the protection of the Kurds. I don't know how much hope I can have in that. Given the fact, like I say, we have been like I said, we have a history of banning allies and so forth. So who knows?
All right, let me get to this next one. This one's for national interest. Israel versus Russia, the Middle East war that could become a nuclear train wreck. Israel remains determined to continue pounding Iranian forces in Syria in a bid to keep Tehran's forces away from Israel's northern border. At the same time, Russia has thousands of troops in Syria that could be caught in the crossfire or even become belligerents if Moscow if Moscow tires of its Syrian ally being pummeled. And if Israel and Russia comes to blows, would Israel's big brother, the United States, feel compelled to intervene? Not that Jerusalem or Moscow are eager for such a fight. Neither of us desire a military enemy. During a recent interview in Jerusalem, it will be detrimental to both sides. Yet Israel's policy boils down to this: it will do whatever it sees as necessary to eject Iranian forces from Syria. And if Russia doesn't like it, then that's just the price of enduring that Syria doesn't become another Iranian rocket base on Israel's border. Relations between Jerusalem and Moscow are far warmer than during the Cold War. The result is a strange embrace reminiscent of the U.S.-Soviet detente of the 1970s. On the surface, a certain friendliness and desire for cooperation. Yet beneath the smiles is wariness, suspicion, and clash of fundamental interests. No one in Israel is confused about who the Russians are and who they are aligned with, said IDF official. Who spoke on condition of anonymity. The Russians are not our allies, to put it mildly, We have one ally, and that is the United States. The Russians are here for totally different objectives. They are supporting a regime that has an unspoken goal of annihilating Israel if they could. They are also part of a coalition that supports Iran. Just how easily Israeli military operations can trigger an incident became evident during a September 2018 strike on ammunition depots in western Syria. Anti-aircraft missiles launched by Syrian gunners accidentally shot down a Russian IL-20 surveillance aircraft, killing 15 people. Israel denies Russian accusations that it deliberately used the Russian plane as cover or failed to give Moscow sufficient warning of the raid. Yet Russia still blamed U.S. for the mishap. Russia still blames Israel for the mishap and retaliated by supplying advanced S-300 anti-aircraft missiles to Syria. Nonetheless, Israel sees value in Russia as a potential restraint on Iran and a possible lever to get Iranian forces out of Syria. After a February meeting between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Vladimir Putin to mend fences after the IL-20 incident, Israel officials claimed Putin agreed that foreign forces should withdraw from Syria. For Moscow, friendly relations with Israel offer more influence in the Middle East, even as America may be scaling down its presence in the region. Still, the Kremlin has denounced Israeli strikes in Syria as illegitimate. Syria has been a Russian ally for more than 50 years, and it was Russian airstrikes, along with Iranian and Hezbollah troops, that served Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's faltering regime from ISIS and other rebel groups. At least 63,000 Russian troops have served in Syria since 2015, though Putin has promised since 2016 that Russian forces would withdraw. Russia currently retains more than 5,000 troops and private military contractors in Syria, backed by several dozen aircraft and helicopters. And Russia is in Syria to stay. The Syrian port of Tartus is Russia's only naval base in the Mediterranean. In 2016, Moscow and Damascus signed a 49-year agreement that allows nuclear-powered Russian warships to operate from there. In addition, Russian aircraft and surface-to-air missiles, including the long-range S-400 defense system, operate from at least 2 air bases in western Syria. Israel can live with the Russians next door, but not the Iranians. Israeli officials warn of Tehran's plan to station 100,000 Iranian and allied troops in Syria. Hezbollah, with its estimated arsenal of 130,000 plus rockets, already menaces Israel's Lebanon frontier. Syria joining Lebanon as second Iranian rocket base is the stuff of Israeli nightmares. So basically, what Israel has to understand, or what people need to understand when they listen to the chat, before, Israel went out and bombed a whole bunch of Arab countries for no good reason other than to completely dominate them. I think what happens in these discussions is that people make it seem like Syria doesn't want Israel to be there, or that Iran doesn't want Israel to be there, or that Iraq doesn't want Israel to be there, or that Lebanon doesn't want Israel to be there. In reality, it's Israel who is attacking all of these countries. It's threatening Iran. It's attacking Syria through Lebanon, violating the airspace of Lebanon. It's killing allegedly Iranian troops in Syria, but there's no evidence that ever presents that these are Iranian troops to begin with. It just seems like they're just regular Syrian citizens who happen to be working government jobs, such as parking tickets, like So what I'm saying here is that Russia has a right to be there, and Russia is the only thing that really keeps the Middle East stable at this point. So if Israel and Russia go to blows, Russia would be justified in throwing down the gauntlet on Israel, because Israel is occupying another group of people in their land, threatening the people of the north, which is Lebanon, attacking Syria to the east unjustly, and threatening to go after Iran, which is further east of their occupation as it stands. I just find this interesting that people make it seem like they're the victims and that they're justified in whatever they do, but in reality, they really don't have any justifications here. DE, jump in.
Israel has to do this for as long as they can, and they have to keep the U.S. The only way they can do this is keeping the U.S. on edge. Israel has to look like the victim, and they're defending themselves against this Goliath called the Arab. You know, if they don't bomb the other people, they're gonna come after them. First it was Saddam, now it's Iran, and it was before that it was Egypt, and then Syria. So Israel has to make it appear that we are these little God's people. You know, we're this small nation who are God's people defending the realm. And people don't look at it, people look at it through Bible eyes, instead of reality. And that's what's going to get the U.S. in trouble, because you got a lot of people in the U.S. who believe that Israel is the righteous arm of God, and that's gonna get the U.S. drawn into a war that might destroy it.
Scholar Chang, you have anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, I don't understand. I still don't understand. Why the hell do we have a problem with Iran? Iran is unlike Saudi Arabia. Iran does not seek to, they say that, Iran is the sponsor of war terrorism. Yeah, because they're supporting no, I'm sorry, not because okay. Let me reframe that. They don't support quote unquote terrorism because they want to spread global Islamic regime, so forth. They support quote unquote support terrorists because they want to counter what the Sunnis were doing to the Shiites. Like, for example, in Lebanon, for example, in Yemen, for example, in what's the other one? In Syria, right? But because United States has interest with Saudi, so all of a sudden Iran becomes this epitome of evil of evil of Islam. Because unlike Saudi Arabia, you don't see Iranian. For example, have you guys noticed that when Iranian go when all the so-called Islamic terrorists that you guys seen, none of them were that actually attack Western citizens and so forth in the Western country. None of them came from or directly linked to Iran. I mean, can you guys pick one? I haven't heard of any. But yeah, somehow they were being portrayed as this global export of terrorism that just want to spread Islamic ideology. Because Shia, I'll be honest, unlike Sunni, Shia Islam, Shia Muslims were not as antagonistic, in contrary public belief, as antagonistic to Western ideal as they are, as their Sunni counterparts are, right? Wahhabism was a Sunni ideology. Al Qaeda was a Sunni ideology. ISIS was a Sunni ideology. So I don't know that what's all these and all these anti-Iran sentiment came from in the Trump administration and so forth. But I kind of sort of understand because United States being with the South middle the Gulf states for a long time. So, but it's pretty unfortunate. I just hate when they keep using the word that #1 exporter of global terrorism, where they all the Iran also being mislabeled that when the #1 global terrorism exporter, let's be honest here, are in the Gulf states. That's what I want to say. Yeah, that's one thing.
Complex, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Dee and Scholar Chang and yourself covered it very well. I have nothing to put in on this one.
All right. This next one is from Stratfor. Where does Iran fit in a world defined by great power competition? In the course of just 2 weeks, the White House broke a tariff ceasefire and escalated its tech war with China. North Korea conducted a pair of short-range ballistic missile tests. The United States seized a North Korean vessel. Tehran announced it would stop complying with parts of the Iran nuclear deal. 4 oil tankers were allegedly attacked near energy vital Strait of Hormuz. A major Saudi pipeline was hit by a drone flown by Yemen's Houthi rebels, and the United States evacuated non-essential personnel from Iraq in reaction to intelligence threats of Iranian attacks against U.S. targets. When things are moving this fast, it becomes all the more important to take pause and reevaluate the intent of the main players of the world stage to figure out where we're heading. The White House strategy for Iran is fairly straightforward. Discredit the Iran nuclear deal, expand and enforce sanctions to cripple the Iranian economy, lay the groundwork for widespread unrest, and apply economic and military pressure to coerce the Iranian government to the negotiating table. If the regime topples under internal pressure, consider it a bonus prize. The strategy is laden with problematic assumptions. Tehran is facing a series of economic duress, but to use Iran Foreign Minister Javad Zarif phrase, Iran has a PhD in evading sanctions. The Iranian security apparatus has a strong track record in quashing protests, and sanctions-driven unrest may have a better chance at whipping up nationalist fervor than it does at triggering any countrywide uprising. And while there's a chance that Iran will try to keep a back channel to the United States open to mitigate war tensions, Iran will plan on riding on the economic storm and await the results of the U.S. 2020 presidential election in hopes of negotiating with a less hawkish administration. Iran is also not going to sit on its hands while getting pummeled with sanctions. In fact, the recent oil tanker incident and drone strikes on Saudi oil pumping stations may reveal a concerted effort by Tehran to telegraph a potent message that any war with Iran will come at the cost of disrupting energy shipping traffic through the most vital oil artery in the world. If an Iranian hand in these attacks is proved, it's an incredible bold move, rather than more subtle and covert means of incrementally pushing back against the United States. These actions not only are just enough to raise the specter of wider devastation, but for some members of the White House, they may be just enough to qualify as a trigger for military strikes. Even a U.S. plan for limited strikes against Iranian proxy targets in the region or sensitive nuclear and military sites in Iran itself would have to come with a contingency plan for a wider military escalation. Hence, the recent hyper speculation over leaks from the U.S. National Security meeting that allegedly discussed a plan to send 120,000 troops to the Middle East or to the region. The world has already witnessed Iran's militant proxy prowess in Iraq and the Syrian and Yemen civil wars. Just imagine the militant force Iran would bring to bear in defending its own soil. And while Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates may share an interest in weakening Iran as much as possible, while U.S. President Donald Trump is in office, they are also prime targets for Iranian retaliation. United Arab Emirates, in particular, is unlikely willing to stomach the economic cost of going to war with Iran. Russia reviews its options. I'm not going to go any further into this, but if anything, Iran is a strategic nation state in the not just in the Middle East, but on the world stage, because 1/3 of the oil is shipped right through its region, right through its waters. So if that's going to be the case, then what's going to happen here is if you attack Iran, you're going to cut off India from its oil dependencies on Iran, China's oil dependency on Iran, Afghanistan's oil dependencies on Iran, and many other smaller countries like Japan and others who depend on Iranian oil will have no choice but to come to the table for a fight, or come to the yard for a fight, because if they can't get their oil, which is being sold for pennies on the dollar, if I remember correctly, it's not being sold at full market price, that in itself is disruptive to the economies of those countries, and therefore it's justified for them to go out of their way and join in defending Iran. What's your take on this, D?
Hey, sometime early this week, the Japanese Prime Minister came out and said, "Hey, Iran is not the country that everybody's saying it is, and it is." He came out in support of Iran, and that's going to normally Japan, especially this Prime Minister, is lockstep with the U.S. government and what the U.S. government does. And when he came out and said that, a lot of people started commenting, "What? You know," they said, well, "This is not true. Japan didn't just do that," and that's what happened. So you got the Europeans and Iran is saying, "You know what? You guys are not really stepping up for us. You just sitting back and talking. So we're gonna go back producing our nuclear material." So the Europeans are now coming out and saying, pushing it more. And you see, I guess they got Trump to send somebody to talk to Putin. So Putin now has got to talk to Iran. But I don't think this thing is going to turn to a shooting war in Iran, because it'd be ridiculous. The Saudis are between the Saudis and Israel. Israel might come out ahead, but the Saudis are going to get. I mean, the Saudis should be really reconsider what they're trying to do with Iran when it comes to this issue. Just leave Iran alone, But they're trying. In Yemen, they're trying to keep Yemeni oil off the market. That war has a lot to do with oil, because Yemen can challenge Saudi on producing oil. That's Yemen start producing. Same thing.
Well, I mean,
so
these things typically do. They all typically have something to do with some resource of some kind, right? There's some people in these manospheres that would have you suggest that all of these things at the end of the day are ideological battles, but nay, I say that it's all about the dollar. And Mike, I wanted to ask you, didn't I think back in 2017, didn't the Chinese peg their gold to Iranian oil, or didn't they have some sort of transactional or backing mechanism that they struck a deal with Iran? Was it gold? Was it crypto? What was that? Do you recall?
It's called the Petro Yuan.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So when you ask that question, Mike, there's a number of reasons why the Chinese are actively engaged in a trade war with us. This has even more to do with just the tariffs. You know, think about if we have maneuvers to try to engage Iran in a war that's largely that's basically it's not solicited. You know, it's nothing that, you know, this is maybe like a replay of Saddam where it's like, okay, he didn't do anything, but this conceived threat that we're conjuring up is the justification. No real actual justification, but it's the justification that we're conjuring in our minds that serves as the need to go ahead and do this. You know, doing that when you doing that with a country that has a currency commodity, a real major one, by the way. Okay, petro yuan. Okay, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. You know, and so when the country that's looking to invade that country is also engaging you in a trade war, yeah, you know, this all kind of makes it, you know, gives it another contextual layer to consider.
All right, let me get to this next one. Face-to-faceafrica.com. Barbados drops visa requirements for these 8 African countries. With its eyes set on making the country the #1 business and travel destination in the Caribbean, Barbados is making it easier for citizens of various African countries to visit with ease. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade Senator, Dr. Jerome Walcott, announced that the government has supported the cancellation of visa for citizens of several African countries, which will be implemented with immediate effect. The new implementation affects countries including Cameroon, Ethiopia, Liberia, Morocco, Senegal, Rwanda, Burkina Faso, and Ghana, from which Barbados receives a lot of visitors and has several ties. Citizens from these countries therefore not need a visa when traveling to Barbados. We recognize that Africa, a continent of 54 countries, many of them showing growth rates of 5 and 6% and 7% in terms of Rwanda, it is time for us to look more closely at that continent. We have made a pledge, and we are moving towards establishing a mission in Accra, Ghana, before the end of this year, he said. Dr. Jerome Walcott stated that the move was also to bring Africa and the Caribbean a step closer, as the two share similarities through a common history and could work together to project the Black community. We recognize in terms of travel that stipulations for visas are sometimes a deterrent for tourists and those seeking to establish business with the country. They find it fairly complicated. In this regard, the cabinet of Barbados agreed to remove the visa requirements for several countries in different parts of the world, he said at the press conference last week. The visa exemption has also been extended to other countries across the world, including Gulf states of Bahrain, Jordan, Oman, and Qatar, as well as Asian countries of Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, and India. I want to read this part one more time. Dr. Jerome Walcott stated that the move was also to bring African and the Caribbean a step closer, as the two share similarities through common history and could work together to project the Black community. DE, this is our homeland.
That is one strategic move. I remember when we were discussing Haiti. I said that should be something that Haiti should do.
Mm-hmm.
if Africa,
Mm-hmm.
as it projects, as it is projected to rise,
Mm-hmm.
if it follows that projected course,
Mm-hmm.
small countries, um, unless they are rising with Africa, are going to get left behind because now you got to negotiate with Europe. Become like Barbados will be Barbados will become to Africa as Barbados is to the U.S. You understand? It's the president of the U.S. How often did he go to Barbados?
Mm-hmm.
He will go to England. He'll go to Brazil. He'll go to China. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but Barbados is not counted again because if Barbados had a strategic say with America in 1605 or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
then it would be different. The climate will be different because they have this long history together. So now Barbados is establishing that history with the continent right now. Haiti should do it. ADOS should do it. And I'm going to say that again. ADOS should do it. Don't sit back and say Africa should allow us to get passports. No, you go there and you tell these people, look, we want passports. The people from Brazil, black people from Brazil should do the same thing. Otherwise, you're going to risk Brazil negotiating on your behalf, and they're not going to negotiate. They're going to negotiate on the Caucasian in Brazil behalf, not on the black people in Brazil behalf. The same thing with here in America. America is going to negotiate with Africa
Mm-hmm.
on American Caucasian population's behalf or Latinos' behalf, not the black people's behalf. So the people in America, the ADOS people in America, better start that negotiation process now so that they have a direct connection to Africa.
I've been saying this for at least 3 years in the manosphere that this has to take place, and I've been saying this on this channel for a long time. And as a matter of fact,
Well, Mike,
last
what do you
week,
like? Why are you gonna go? Why are you gonna go and do that and do stuff in Africa when there's stuff to be done here?
Hello?
oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but last week we had this discussion, and Black Gnostics, shout out to him. He said that black people are part of America, and I argue no, that's not the case. The policies say otherwise. What you are saying versus what the policies are is different. And what the Bayesians are doing is they're taking the lead on all this. There's another article that I did not I didn't post to the docket because we didn't, there was no room or time left. The Prime Minister of Barbados is actually negotiating on behalf of the Venezuelan government through the back channels. So this is happening in real time. People want to say, hashtag ADOS this and hashtag ADOS that. This is real strategic. I'm gonna read this one more time. He says the let me go back and find the message.
Well, why are you looking for
The
them? Okay, you got it. You got it. Go ahead.
the move was also to bring Africa and the Caribbean a step closer as the two share similarities through a common history and could work together to project the black community. This is how people outside YouTube are thinking. But when you come to
But we've been
YouTube, they're
pushing
really
this. We've been, but to be fair, this is something we've been pushing.
hmm
We've been pushing this as well.
I just laugh when people come on here and say, "Oh, hashtag this and hashtag that." Well, there's your hashtag right there, right, De?
Yep. You gotta be looking at this thing forward looking,
hmm
not backward looking. Because, like I said, America, if America send an ambassador to Africa, he's going there to Africa to negotiate on behalf of Caucasian America.
hmm
Because Black America really doesn't count.
On multiple occasions, we have clearly stated what it requires, right, to walk into the door. You got to have a briefcase, you got to have a minimum 100 grand, and you got to have a plan.
A lot of
Okay,
black
but
America got that 100 grand.
hey, listen, I ain't trying to count no pockets. I ain't trying to count super chat money and all that shit, right? But I'm almost certain, right, that 100 grand has kind of circulated through these YouTube streets here, right? I'm
Sadly,
almost, I'm almost certain.
Well, it's one of those things. I see somebody from the chat says I'm out of here. It's one of those things where you have to really do the research, man, and that's why we have these hangouts. Because had we not read this article, a lot of these, these ADOS guys or these ADOS people would never had seen anything like this. And this is happening in real time. Barbados wants to be to the rest of the continent. They want to be the Singapore of the Caribbean or to the continent itself. They want to play a pivotal role, despite the fact that there's a distance gap in between travel.
Man, dude, the fourth industrial revolution changes the face of all of this. Because since it's tech based, I mean, wherever you lie terrestrially speaking, as long as you have a solid internet connection and access to cloud storage, you're in the game. And shout out to Joe Black. I saw that he was like, "Yo, I'm stacking and leaving, man. I'm gonna get out here."
Mm-hmm.
True shit.
Yeah. So make sure you're proud there, Mr. D.
Oh yeah, I'm telling you right now. You know that there's a saying at home that there's a Asian everywhere in our planet.
Mm-hmm.
So guess what? You're in Africa, bro.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me read this one last article, and then we can open it up to 11 o'clock. All right, this next one is from Bloomberg.com. Islamic State, largely defeated at home, is rebuilding in Africa. Sitting cross-legged with a Kalashnikov rifle by his side, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, a leader of the Islamic State, used his first video appearance in 5 years to reassure his followers that he was far from defeated. Recorded in a secret location and released at the end of April, the video showed the jihadi leader calmly reflected on the loss of the Islamic State's last swath of Middle Eastern territory in March, largely to a coalition of U.S. and Kurdish forces. He spoke about the Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka that killed more than 250 people, which were claimed by the Sunni group, and said Islamic State would now take its battle across the world. Shortly before, Islamic State had claimed its first attack in Congo, where 3 soldiers were shot dead by what the group was a new Central African Wayat or province. He also praised Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, ISGS, which operates in part of the Sahel region that overlaps Mali and Niger. Africa, he said, would be a land of rebirth. The loss of the core, the caliphate, and was a huge blow to them, says Thomas Abi Hanna, a security analyst with Stratfor. They are really trying to play up the gains they've made elsewhere, and Africa is arguably the place where they've made the worst gains. The continent is fertile ground. Many African states are struggling with a mix of dire poverty and soaring populations. Corruption also fuels discontent, which Islamic State has proved adept at exploiting to recruit fighters and gain support among locals. The countries where it taken root, face severe resource constraints and have limited military capability, making it more difficult for them to counter violent extremist organizations, said General Stephen Townsend, the incoming head of U.S. Africa Command, speaking at a congressional hearing in April. In the video, al-Baghdadi announced he accepted a pledge of loyalty from a group in Burkina Faso and talked of exploiting recent political upheaval to gain footholds in Algeria and Sudan. Islamic State had more than 6,000 fighters in Africa in the middle of last year, according to a paper published by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point. The biggest cell is Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, which has 3,500 members, according to the CTC, most of them in northern Nigeria. That makes it the second largest terrorist organization in Africa after Al-Shabaab, which is based in Somalia and linked to Al-Qaeda. ISGS gained notoriety when it killed 4 American and 5 Nigerian soldiers in the Tongo Tongo, Niger ambush of 2017. In Egypt, Islamic State in the Sinai blew up a Russian airliner with 224 people on board in 2015. A Libyan cell held the city of Sirte for about a year until it was pushed out in 2016. So this is just a map of the Islamic State in Africa right here. You have Tripoli of Libya, 500 fighters. Egypt has 1,250 fighters in the Sinai. Sudan has some kind of state there that's unknown. Somalia has quite a few. Democratic Republic of Congo has some. It's unknown, and a lot of it is in the west, which is Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and Mali. Although Islamic State's ultimate goal may be to merge its affiliates into something resembling a cohesive unit, that's improbable given their vastly differing geographies and cultures. Stratford's Abihana says. But they do benefit from having different branches in far-flung places, he adds. Since 2014, when they declared a caliphate, they've wanted to graduate from a core province to a truly global network, having provinces around the globe, whether in Africa or elsewhere, achieves the broader goal. As a group lost territory in the Middle East and thus its ability to levy taxes and control oil smuggling routes, supporting operations abroad became tougher. There's little evidence of recent transfers of money or fighters from the core of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria to its affiliates in Africa, says Ryan Cummings, a director at the business advisory firm Signal Risk in Cape Town, who's co-written a book being published later this year on Islamic State activities on the continent. This is interesting because terrorists don't eat on their own. You know, somebody is bringing food to them. Can't fight on an empty stomach. So I'd be interested in seeing what the strategy is that the African Union has to deal with these people. My thing is just cut their food supply off, and they'll come out in a few weeks. Any last comments on this?
When you read the article, I was looking at the names on the list, and Stratford, there's an organization similar to that in Toronto. There's one similar to that in London. There's one similar to that in Paris, Germany. Mm-hmm. They all have the same thing in mind. These people are how do I put it? when the U.S. want to do something, they do the studies to see how it will work. They do the long-term and short-term projections to see how it will work, what the probable outcomes will be. The CIA read their papers to the president. A lot of these projections that you see the CIA do, that the president talk about from the CIA are not, well, they are CIA, but they come from off base, what they call off base, which is nobody can connect the CIA to the Stratford group. You know what I'm saying? It's not a direct connection. But how do these people know that they're moving into Africa? Who set up the plan for them to move into Africa? They're moving into Africa just as the U.S. is moving from the Middle East to the Far East in Africa. Just as the British are moving from the Middle East to the Far East in Africa. Just as the French are moving from the Middle East to the Far East in Africa. Same people. The people in South Africa that you just mentioned, signal risk, Israelis. Ta-da! How did they get in there? This is a strategic move, and like when we started the program, I said, you know, I'm afraid of these problems coming up and disrupting Africa's projected rise.
Complex, you have anything you want to add to this?
I do, man. Just give me a minute. I'm having like a little sneeze attack.
All right. Yeah, I mean, somebody has to be feeding these guys. Somebody has to be supplying ammunition to them. They're not making their own guns. They're not making their own bullets. We know that when Gaddafi was taken down, a lot of his weapon cache was redistributed throughout the continent. And he had a large weapons cache. I mean, for obvious reasons, he had to defend his country as well as, project power abroad. So what kept Africa safe in that Francophone region was largely due to Gaddafi's military keeping these guys out. So it was relatively peaceful for the most part, despite the fact that people want to say he's a dictator and this, and that. He really kept the continent pretty safe in that region.
The Saudis had to take him out, you know, because
Yes.
he was a thorn in their side. He even warned them before he died. They're gonna come for me, but what about when they come for you?
Right. Right. I think that this would be a turning point for most African militaries and states to determine how they go about dealing with this. I mean, you can only bomb so many people out of existence, and Africa's militaries are not equipped to really deal with guerrilla warfare like this. The Syrians were caught off guard on this sort of whole entire agenda because they brought out tanks, and these guys are in pickup trucks. So, and the pickup trucks outran the tanks, and you can only shoot at one thing at a time in the tank. You can't shoot at multiple targets. So a lot of the times, the Syrian government, the Syrian military was actually losing more, disproportionately losing assets due to these terrorists. Now you're more than likely going to see the same sort of tactics in Africa, where you're not used to dealing with. Your military is designed to go against other militaries, but when your military has to deal with all these unconventional warfare, that becomes a problem. You take a 35, 45-ton tank onto the battlefield to deal with terrorists. That terrorist isn't driving the tank himself. He's in a bushes somewhere. He'll lay down the IED, take out the treads on your main battle tank or medium-sized battle tank, and you're screwed. you're completely screwed out of all of this. So I it'll be interesting to see what happens. I've talked about this in the past that this is a perfect opportunity for Black people in America to get into the private military corporations and get a contract with some of these governments and push the bad guys out.
If you see what happened in Iraq, what happened in Syria, is that the wars weren't, the people who are fighting back against the U.S. or the British or the French, or they weren't fighting with tanks.
Mm-hmm.
They were wearing down these invading armies with an AK-47 and a rocket launcher.
RPGs.
Yep. And occasionally they were putting some C4 in the IED in the path of a Humvee or something. That's the war of the future. And when you get drones involved in the future, this is the war that we have now, and you're gonna get drones involved in the future, which somebody's gonna put a drone, a $100 drone, and direct to whatever path. You driving down the road in a Humvee, the drone's gonna come head right at you.
Right.
Or you're sitting inside your barracks, and that drone is flying right into the barracks.
Mm-hmm.
No big tank warfare or these used missiles raining down. War is going different path. And African nations have to right now start preparing for that type of war instead of the old type, because they're accustomed to fighting one another and their own people instead of an external enemy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said, a lot of ex-military guys in the U.S. could actually go over there and train, police departments and national defense forces for most of these African countries to actually, better train them to deal with counterterrorism as opposed to trying to use a sledgehammer against a thumbtack. I see African governments, African militaries always responding to terrorist threats by bringing out the military when that's the wrong approach, right? Your military was designed to go up against another military, so therefore, it's the wrong application. You need a better police force, a better SWAT team. The United States, they don't have to use military to go after bad guys in the United States. If you think about the terrorist Dylan Roof, they didn't use the military to go after him. They used law enforcement to go after him. So same thing with the synagogue shooter who shot the synagogue up in Pittsburgh. They didn't use military. So there's got to be a different approach when you're going against something like this. All you gotta do is starve them out, in my opinion. Just let them.
I don't know if you remember when Rawlings took over Ghana. You remember the first thing that he did?
No.
He trained every able-bodied man up to 65 years old how to shoot a rifle. If you know how to defend your land, you're never going to have another coup d'etat. No soldier is going to come knock on your door. And sure enough, since he took over the government of Ghana, he retired now. The military never took power in Ghana again.
So they had the Second Amendment in Ghana?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to serve.
Wow.
The same thing happened in Venezuela right now. They're training every man to use a weapon. They're training everybody. You got to learn to defend your country, not against the soldier in the army. Even though if something starts up, these soldiers want to take over the country, guess who they got to fight? The neighbor next door got an AK-47 just like the soldier got one. So it's not likely that they're going to fight neighbor against neighbor. But if you go into the country from external force, then you got to fight the soldier and the guy next door. So the war is not with these missiles raining down on you, even though it can happen, but it's going to be the technical war, you know, where somebody comes in with a AK-47 and a grenade.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, some of us are going to be over there very soon, so we may have to bump heads with these guys, you know, and having a firearm in the United States, practicing your Second Amendment, going to get your license to carry, you know, and getting acclimated with CCW, concealed carry, you know, could be very beneficial when you start to travel in these areas where you're not afraid and know how to defend yourself in when dealing with conflict, or like what happened in Nairobi when the Al Shabaab went into the mall in 2013 and shot the whole mall up and tore those people out the frame over there. That was very tragic. But had they been better prepared, you know, they would have been able to counter that whole entire operation. That was a failure of intelligence.
Well, you have like, I don't know. We were discussing some of this, and you saying that these groups that they're saying, well, this group is coming to Africa now. Yeah, they're coming to Africa now because somebody sending them there, and they send them there for a purpose, to disrupt the society, disrupt the growth of the society, the cohesiveness of the society. And if you got to use, if this guy comes in with his group and starts a war in a country, guess what the country has to do? It has to now go from educating its people, providing good health care, building housing, growing food. You got to be fighting. So your whole country is going to stay in the condition that it is instead of progressing.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to end it tonight. Thank you all for joining us. If you're in the chat, please hit the like button if you have not already done so. Share the video if possible, and we'll be back tomorrow with Crypto Talk with Lionel. So thank you all for joining us. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.